Everyone thinks they know what built the modern world: the internet, the airplane, the smartphone in your pocket. Wrong, wrong, and wrong. The single most important invention of the last 100 years isn't glowing or flying or connected to Wi-Fi. It's a metal box. Literally. Just a rectangular steel container, the kind you've driven past 1,000 times on the back of a truck and never once thought about. And that's exactly the point. This box is so boring, so forgettable, that almost nobody knows its name. But without it, there's no iPhone made in China, no cheap sneakers from Vietnam, no bananas in a Minnesota grocery store in January. Without this box, globalization, as we know it, simply doesn't exist. So let's talk about the shipping container, and why the most world-changing invention in modern history looks like, well, nothing at all. Before 1956, moving goods across an ocean was, frankly, medieval. Ships would pull into port, and dozens of longshoremen would climb aboard and load cargo by hand. Not pallets, not boxes. Individual items. Barrels of olive oil, sacks of coffee, crates of machine parts, all shaped differently, all packed separately, all lifted, one at a time. A single ship might take a week or more just to load. And then, once it reached its destination, you'd do the whole thing in reverse. Unload everything, by hand, sort it, and load it onto trucks or trains, which had completely different shapes and sizes of cargo space. Every single item touched by human hands, again and again and again. It's estimated that for every day a cargo ship spent at sea, and spent nearly just as long sitting in port. Ships, you see, don't make money floating in a harbor. They make money moving. So all of this waiting, it was insanely expensive. And that's before you even get to the theft. Loose cargo sitting on a dock, waiting to be loaded, was basically an invitation. Dock workers had a nickname for the goods that mysteriously vanished: the fall, as in, it just so happened to fall off the truck. In some ports, theft wasn't a risk, it was a cost of doing business, quietly built into the price of everything you bought. Then, in 1956, a trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean had an idea so simple, it's almost embarrassing that no one had scaled it before. What if, instead of unloading a truck's cargo onto a ship, you just put the entire truck trailer, box and all, onto the ship? No unpacking, no repacking. Just lift the whole sealed container and set it down. McLean bought an old oil tanker, retrofitted it, and loaded 58 containers onto it. It sailed from New Jersey to Texas. It was, on the surface, completely unremarkable. A boat carrying boxes, but economists later calculated the actual difference it made, and the numbers are almost hard to believe. Loading loose cargo, by hand, cost around $5.86 per ton. Loading a standardized container, 16 cents. That's not a small improvement. That's a nearly 40 times reduction in cost. Almost overnight, the economics of shipping something across an ocean flipped upside down. Now, you'd think an idea this good would spread instantly. It didn't. Because here's the thing about infrastructure. It only works if everyone agrees to use the same version of it. Ports needed to be rebuilt with giant cranes designed specifically to lift these boxes. Ships needed to be redesigned with container-shaped holds. Trucks and trains needed chassis that could carry the exact same dimensions. And crucially, every country, every company, every port from Rotterdam to Singapore had to agree on the exact same size box. Otherwise, what's the point? You'd just be creating a dozen incompatible systems instead of one universal one. This is a pattern that shows up again and again in technology. The best idea doesn't win because it's clever. It wins because it becomes the standard everyone builds around. And so, through the 60s and 70s, a wave of international standardization slowly locked in the dimensions we still use today: 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall, 20 or 40 feet long. Numbers so unremarkable you've probably never noticed them, despite seeing thousands of these boxes in your life. And once the standard locked in, the effects were staggering. Ports that used to take a week to load a ship could now do it in about a day. Dockworker jobs, which had once required massive labor forces, shrank dramatically. Some estimates suggest by 90% or more in certain ports. That was brutal for the workers who lost their jobs, no question. But for global trade, it was rocket fuel. Because here's what almost nobody realized at the time: if it becomes dramatically cheaper to move a physical object from one side of the planet to the other, then it suddenly makes economic sense to manufacture that object wherever labor is cheapest and ship it to wherever it'll be sold. Before the shipping container, moving goods across the ocean was so expensive that most manufacturing happened close to the customer. It just made sense. After the shipping container, distance stopped mattering nearly as much. Suddenly, a factory in Shenzhen wasn't a strange, exotic option. It was just the cheapest one. This is the part that tends to blow people's minds. The rise of China as the world's factory, the entire concept of globalization as we understand it today. Cheap goods, complex international supply chains. The idea that your shoes were designed in Oregon, assembled in Vietnam, using rubber from Thailand and cotton from India. None of that happens without this box. Not one piece of it. Economists who study trade have pointed out something wild. Over a couple of decades, global trade grew by orders of magnitude, and standard trade agreements and tariff reductions, the stuff that gets all the political attention, only explain a fraction of that growth. A huge chunk of the actual explanation is just containerization made shipping so cheap that trade barriers that used to matter suddenly didn't matter nearly as much. In other words, our lowered tariffs got a lot of the credit, but a boring metal box did a lot of the actual work. And it's not just about cheap goods. Global supply chains, the interconnected web, where a car might have parts crossing a dozen borders before final assembly, depend entirely on the predictability and low cost that containers provide. Pull that piece out, and modern manufacturing as we know it, this intricate choreography of parts arriving from all over the world exactly when they're needed, simply falls apart. We got a preview of this actually pretty recently. Remember when a single ship got stuck sideways in the Suez Canal for 6 days? Global trade nearly seized up, billions of dollars in goods stranded. And that was one ship blocking one canal for less than a week. It was a tiny glimpse of just how much weight this invisible system is quietly carrying. All the time, everywhere, without you ever noticing. So here's the uncomfortable truth about how the modern world actually got built. It wasn't some flashy breakthrough. It wasn't a genius coder or a garage startup. It was a trucking guy who looked at an incredibly inefficient process and asked a boring, obvious-sounding question. Why are we unpacking and repacking this stuff so many times? And the answer changed the entire planet's economy. Somewhere in a port right now, thousands of these boxes are being stacked by giant cranes, completely unnoticed, doing exactly what they've done for almost 70 years, quietly making the entire modern world possible. Next time you see one rolling down the highway, you might just look at it a little differently.